The Big Ten plays favorites to put Ohio State in their conference championship game, a new college football playoff poll is out, and which matchups should you watch in Week 15? I'm Jay Smith, and this is After Further Review.
And now, after further review, a Clemson student's perspective on sports.
There's a personal foul on number 99 of the defense. After he tackled the quarterback, he's giving them business down there. That's a 15-yard penalty.
Well, welcome in, everyone. I'm Jay Smith, and you are listening to After Further Review. Appreciate you tuning in, whether it is through the podcast, the AFR podcast. It's available on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. Or if you're watching on Facebook, do appreciate it. For a lot of teams, the regular season is pretty much over, but there's still a lot of games on the slate for Week 15, and there's still a lot of storylines. And obviously the biggest storyline from this week was the announcement that Michigan had canceled their game with Ohio State, obviously known as the game. A historical rivalry that I enjoy watching every year, even though I'd say for the last dozen years or so, it really hasn't been very competitive. Certainly has been in favor of Ohio State, but it's a big rivalry game, not just in the Big Ten, but really nationally. And this game was canceled after Michigan, announced more positive COVID-19 cases within their football program. And so that put the Buckeyes in a pretty difficult predicament. And this is something that I talked about on last week's show, and if at the time it didn't seem likely that Michigan was going to cancel the game, there was no indication that Michigan was going to cancel the game, but as we have seen throughout this season, things develop rather quickly, and decisions can be reversed, or new ones can be made in a matter of days. And so when you look at Ohio State, right, a team that right now is fourth in the college football rankings, I believe they've been fourth in every single college football playoff ranking so far, and that was the big controversy, was having Clemson, a one-loss team, ahead of Ohio State, but really this is something the committee said, and I agreed with it, was that there just wasn't enough on Ohio State's resume to bump them above Clemson. Clemson had just accomplished a little bit more throughout the season, and the loss obviously sticks out, but you have to be realistic in the fact that Trevor Lawrence wasn't playing, 3 starters on defense for Clemson wasn't playing. It still took the Irish 2 overtimes on the road to win that game. So that was the initial controversy of the first college football playoff rankings. Now, Ohio State sits there at 5-0, and as I've touched on in several of these episodes now, they really have not had much competition this season. Now, Penn State was supposed to be a really big game. That was the week 2 on the road, big matchup in the Big Ten, and even really at the time, it was going to have a huge impact on the college football playoff picture, because Penn State was a top 10 football team, coming into this season. I think they were 8th in their initial, I hesitate to say their preseason ranking, but before their season began, the week of, I believe, their season was starting on week 1. They were in the 8th spot. And then obviously the Indiana game happened, and you can dissect that 101 different ways, but Penn State obviously has not panned out to be the team that a lot of us were expecting. And listen, I didn't go into this year thinking that Penn State was a college football playoff caliber team. But if you'd have told me that the Nittany Lions would have become the first AP top 10 team to start the season 0-5, I don't think I would have believed you. I don't think anybody really would have believed you, because Penn State is a talented football team. I think that they don't believe, and their back was really broken, I think, by Indiana. It was certainly not a bad game against Ohio State, right? Ohio State only won that game 38-25, and it was on the road. And so, Penn State, I think, showed up for that game, but then Penn State lost to Maryland, and it just kind of, you could tell the wind was out of their sails, and their season was over. So when you look at the Buckeyes schedule and you say, okay, who are these guys played? You got Nebraska on there, which, That's not really impressive. Penn State, we've already talked about. Rutgers, there's nothing there about Rutgers that's going to impress anybody. A Maryland game, a road Maryland game was canceled. Then they had Indiana. If you'd asked anybody at the beginning of the year, is the Penn State game for Ohio State, is Penn State going to mean more than Indiana? Like, which of those two games, which one's going to mean more? Everyone would have said Penn State, right? Because Penn State was the top 10 team. Penn State had a few years of proven success. Penn State was a big rival with Ohio State. It was a big game in the Big Ten. Well, that didn't end up being the case this year, right? Indiana-Ohio State was the premier game of the Big Ten. And I think some people could argue, and I believe, this is my position, Indiana's the second best team in the Big Ten. They are the second best team in the Big Ten. If you wanted a true Big Ten championship, I think these teams need to rematch. I think you need to have what you're seeing in the ACC, which is, Clemson and Notre Dame facing off again after Clemson lost in the regular season. But you know what? At the end of the day, those are the clear two best teams in the ACC, and it would have been a shame to have divisions in the ACC this year and to, let's say, see a Notre Dame team in the same division as Clemson, and then Clemson gets knocked out of a conference championship. And again, this goes back to the foresight that the ACC had. They knew, okay, you have Clemson, right? If you're the ACC, you're sitting there and you say, all right, we've got Clemson. They're our premier team. They've been here since the founding of the conference. We need to make sure that they're taken care of. And there's nothing wrong with self-serving interests, especially when your teams are concerned if you're a conference. We're going to talk about the rule change made by the Big Ten yesterday to allow Ohio State in the Big Ten championship. We're going to talk about that. I don't have a problem with conferences playing favorites, because we all know the ACC would bend over backwards for Clemson. The SEC would bend over backwards for Alabama. And I think the Big 12 would do it for Oklahoma. I think you could find a team in every conference where, for the collective good, rules would be adjusted. And in the Big 10, that team is Ohio State, right? That team is Ohio State. However, going back to this discussion about the two best teams in the Big Ten, I think it's Ohio State and Indiana. I'm not trying to discount anything that Pat Fitzgerald and Northwestern have accomplished this year. It's really been a pretty surprising run, and I've been impressed. I've watched the Wildcats play a handful of times, but I still think on a neutral location, matchup, I think Indiana and Ohio State would be the best football game between the best two teams in the Big Ten. That's not what we're going to get because, again, Big Ten decided they wanted to do divisions like they do on a regular year, and it kind of goes back to the whole, just poor planning, poor execution, and poor management by Kevin Warren and the Big Ten Conference. This was really handled very poorly, this being this season, and I think it's going to have long-lasting ramifications for the reputation of the Big Ten. I really do. I think it's going to have long-lasting impacts. But either way, let's go back to Ohio State's schedule. Buckeyes, they have Nebraska, they have Penn State, they have Rutgers. So far, you're not impressing me. Okay, that's 3 of your games. So far, you're not impressing me. Maryland game's canceled. Can't do anything about that. Now, Indiana's one that does look good. 42-35 win. Ended up being a lot closer than I think a lot of people, especially those Ohio State fanboys, thought it was going to be. I think a lot of Ohio State fanboys thought, oh, this is going to be a smackdown. We're gonna annihilate this Cinderella story. And Indiana proved they were the real deal. If anybody had any questions about Indiana going into that game, I think they were answered. And for me, I took the position of, listen, Ohio State's clearly the more talented team. Ohio State clearly should win this game. But Indiana's playing inspired. Indiana believes they can win. Penn State didn't believe they could win. So it wasn't, really, it was still a close game. It was still a close game. But seeing Indiana's commitment throughout 4 quarters and 60 minutes, I thought it showed me that that's an up-and-coming program. That's an up-and-coming program that I don't think next year is going to fall off. I'm not totally aware of what, how many starters Indiana is going to be losing and what their recruiting class looks like next year. I'd have to look into that. But I think based off of what I've seen this year, I'm impressed with the Hoosiers, and they might be a good dark horse pick in the coming years. I really think that They proved a lot to a lot of people this season. So for Ohio State, that's certainly a good win. Then you had at Illinois, that was canceled. That's not really, that wouldn't have done anything to the resume. The only thing those games do is, really hurt you, especially if they're close. I mean, if you win by 35, nobody's really going to say anything. It's like, oh, okay, all right. But if it's like a 7-point win, like Clemson playing Boston College close, people are going to be like, oh, well, what's going on? What's the deal here? And so that game being canceled, I don't think really had a huge impact on Ohio State. Week after, Michigan State. This is a team that's struggled a lot the last few years. Didn't expect this to be close, and it wasn't. It was a 52-12 win for the Spartans. And this is where things got complicated, because you had Ohio State at 5-0, and originally having scheduled 8 games, right? The Big Ten stipulated you need to play 6 games to be eligible for the conference championship game, which, again, means that you can only have 2 games canceled, because the Big Ten, not having the foresight, to plan things in a more proactive way, because they started so late, they didn't even have the opportunity, from what I understand, to even reschedule games. If the game was called off, it was canceled. There was no postponement. The game was canceled. What you're seeing from the ACC and the SEC and the Big 12 and even some other Group of 5 conferences is that they are now able to reschedule postponed games. Why? Because they started earlier, which is what the Big 10 and the Pac-12 should have done. But you know what? You can't do anything about it now. You can only point the finger at the conference and the commissioners of the conference. And I'm not surprised by the Pac-12's decision. I am surprised by the Big Ten's decision, because the Big Ten likes to pride itself on, being a premier football conference with the Ohio States, the Penn States, the Michigans. And it's really just Ohio State at this point. They're a one, they're a one-trick pony, I guess is what I'm trying to say. They don't. Michigan has not been in the national conversation for at least a decade. If you want to talk about football, Penn State has made strides. Now, Penn State's a bit of a unique situation because of what happened when Joe Pa left and everything that happened there. There was obviously going to be a point or a stretch of time where Penn State kind of had to rebuild, create that image. And so that's understandable, but it's really just Ohio State at this point. Minnesota made some noise, and even Wisconsin. And that's the thing, is that, you have these teams in the Big Ten that are consistent. Wisconsin, I think, is a good example. This program that's really been pretty consistent for the last 6 to 8 years, and they're just not able to get over that hump. They're just not able to surpass the best team in the conference, being Ohio State. And until that happens, until the Badgers or the Golden Gophers win a conference championship, the Big Ten's just not going to feel like a very deep conference. And the same thing can really be said right now about the ACC or the Big 12. I mean, you have Oklahoma, who's won the last 3 Big 12 championships. You have Clemson, who has won the last 5 ACC championships. Now, the ACC this year has a few more teams that are certainly more competitive with Clemson, and I'm going to bring up Miami, even though Clemson thrashed Miami. But I'm going to bring up Miami. I'm going to bring up UNC. Obviously Notre Dame. I consider them an ACC school. They are this year. In technicality, they are not every other year, but they're really an ACC school. And so I think this year the ACC has really proven to me, okay, there are other teams out there that can compete and can beat Clemson. They can beat Clemson. And so that's not an invincible team anymore. Big Ten right now, it's just all Ohio State. So all this is to say, the Buckeyes didn't have a lot of room for error, right? They didn't have a lot of room for error because it's not like you can lose to any of the teams on their schedule and feel safe about a college football playoff berth. You can't say the same thing about Clemson. Clemson lost to Notre Dame, and they're comfortably sitting at 3rd right now. I think they're pretty comfortable. Clemson needs to win, obviously. That they don't have the luxury of losing another game, but there is zero discussion right now about Clemson potentially missing the college football playoff as things stand now. Now, that ACC championship game might have the most impact on any potential shakeups. I am still of the opinion that if Notre Dame loses the ACC championship to Clemson, they can still get in, and I think they'll slide in maybe above a high. I don't know. I mean, we've gone through a lot of different scenarios. I still don't think the committee wants to see two teams from the same conference in a national championship game. So that would make me believe Clemson and Notre Dame would rematch in a semifinal, which would be very strange. But I think people would prefer that to a national championship. You know, that just the possibility of it, rather. So Ohio State was on a razor-thin margin all year long, and that was validated. You know, people were saying this. I was saying this, and everybody, you know, a lot of other people that said, no. You know, Ohio State, they're in 100%. No issue. It's Ohio State. Well, the committee is not really of that same mindset because they came out and put them in fourth. And there's no margin of error there because you go one more spot down and you're out of the playoff. You're out of the top four. And I think that was a bit of a rebuke on the part of the committee, basically looking at the Big Ten and saying, listen, guys, you're playing like half the number of games, right? You just look at this, okay? If you go and you look at the rankings and you look at all these teams, right? Alabama, 9-0. Notre Dame, 10-0. Clemson, 9-1. Texas A&M, 7-1. Florida, 8-1. Iowa State, 8-2. Cincinnati, 8-0. Georgia, 6-2. Miami, 8-1. Those are your top 10 teams. Those are the top 10 teams. The only team I did not name, Ohio State. Guess what their record is? 5-0. 5-0. The closest team to them in terms of number of games played is Cincinnati at 8-0, Georgia at 6-2, and Texas A&M at 7-1. All of those three. So those three teams have played 8 games. Everybody else in the top 10 has played more. So 6. Let me do this math off the top of my head. So 6 teams of the top 10. 6 of the top 10 teams have played at least 9 games. 6 of the top 10 have played at least 9 games. 3 of the top 10 have played 8 games. 1 team has played 5. So if you're that team that's played 5 games, you better really, really hope that you've played some really good opponents. Especially if there are some teams below you that are either undefeated or 1 loss. Now, for Ohio State, thankfully, the only undefeated team below them is Cincinnati. And the Bearcats, as good as they may be this season, they're not going to jump all those other teams. They're not going to jump Florida. They're not going to jump. You know, there's a window for them at 8, but you have a 2-loss Iowa State team above Cincinnati. So the Bearcats are just not getting a lot of love. But, as I've said before, you know, Ohio State's on razor-thin ice. I mean, they are sitting at 4. Texas A&M at 5, at 7-1, I don't consider a threat. They're just kind of there as a placeholder. Again, they don't have the tiebreaker over Alabama in the West. They're not going to play in an SEC championship, and they're not going to get into the playoff. I don't think a 1-loss team that didn't play in their conference championship is going to be able to make any argument that they're a top 4 team. It's great that they're at 5. But that's their ceiling. A&M's ceiling is 5. They will not go up any higher than that. And Florida at 8-1, you know, obviously they're below A&M because A&M, you know, head to head, they have a win over the Gators. If you were to ask me if Florida had not lost to A&M, where would Florida be ranked? I think they're 3rd. I think you have Alabama 1. I think you have Notre Dame 2. I think you have Florida 3, and you have Clemson 4. And I think a 1-loss Clemson is above an undefeated Ohio State. I think Ohio State right now would be at 5th if Florida was undefeated. Now, that's a playing hypothetical, but that's how I see the rankings right now. That's how I think that they would be playing out. So, what does this mean? What does this mean if you're an Ohio State fan? Because you're 5-0 and you got one more game left, and you need to play that game against Michigan. You need to play that game against Michigan so that you can get into the Big Ten Championship. Well, earlier this week they announced, nope, can't play the game. The game is off. And obviously, for I would say about 24 hours, there were a lot of Ohio State fans. It probably felt pretty sick to their stomachs, and understandably so, because they realized that the incompetence of their conference commissioner has put them in a situation where we're even having to talk about, will Ohio State be eligible for a Big Ten title game? And see, that's not something that any other premier team in their respective conference has ever even had to worry about. Clemson's never, obviously they lost to Notre Dame, but there's never been a situation where Clemson wasn't going to be able to play the required number of games. There was never a situation where Alabama was not going to be able to play the required number of games. That just didn't exist because those conferences were more proactive in how they attacked the scheduling of the season. The Big Ten was not, and their teams are suffering for it. So, what do you have as a result? Well, the Big Ten got together, and there was a meeting between a bunch of I believe all the ADs. Yeah, it was all 14 ADs and Big Ten Commissioner Kevin Warren, and they met on Wednesday morning to have a discussion. I use air quotes there because I don't know if it was as much a discussion as it was a, hey, we did a, I don't have, maybe they didn't admit they did a really bad job. Let's say they didn't. Maybe it was just a, hey, we really need Ohio State to be in this conference championship game because they're our only shot at making a playoff, which is more money for all of us. So we're just going to completely change the rules to make sure that Ohio State's eligible for our conference championship. That's how the conversation went. And you even had Iowa athletic director who, he's the chairman of the CFP committee. He was on this call, and he did say that he was going to recuse himself from the discussions and the voting, which I think is an appropriate decision, obviously. I mean, being the chairman of the CFP selection committee this year. But he was on the video conference, and he just wanted to listen to the discussion, obviously being an athletic director. A lot of ADs have come out and said that it was a quote very collaborative experience. Maybe it was. Maybe Warren was standing there with a pitchfork and he was just kind of poking them down the road and saying, "All right, guys, this is what's going to happen. This is what we're going to do." No AD so far has disclosed the voting numbers, but I think this was the right decision for the Big Ten. I think it was the right decision. Yes, it is obviously clearly, a rule that was changed in favor of only Ohio State, right? This only really impacts one team. But the conference probably also realizes, hey, this is the only team that has any shot at making the playoff. Right now, they're still on really thin ice at 4. They've only played 5 games. They've got to have something to their resume because I honestly believe, if the Big Ten did not make this decision and Ohio State was stuck at 5-0 and left out of their conference championship, they are not making it into the playoff. They're going to drop, and I think you would see potentially, if Clemson and Notre Dame switch, as I've indicated and as I have predicted, you would see 2 ACC teams. You would see Alabama, and that even kind of creates more of an interesting landscape because you would have, assuming that Florida loses to Alabama, you'd have that A&M team, you would have an Iowa State team, you'd have a Cincinnati team, maybe Texas A&M does slip in there. Maybe that's how they get in, which would, I think, just be I don't think that anybody wants to see A&M in the college football playoff. I don't know who thinks A&M is a top 5 team. But they're there. That's what only losing to Alabama will get you is a nice, cozy top 5 ranking. But either way, this was clearly done in favor of Ohio State, by the Big Ten, and I don't think it was the wrong decision. I think I don't think it should be. Listen, I'm no fan of Ohio State, but it's not. As a football fan, as a college football fan, I don't want to see a team not eligible for a conference championship because their own conference was incompetent. I want to see that team play the games And hey, maybe I want to see the team win. Maybe I want to see the team lose. But I want to see the team play the games. I want to see the student athletes play the games. I want to see the coaches, and I want to give them an opportunity to coach in the games. The Big Ten didn't do that for their own teams, which is, a problem. But I still hold the position that I would rather a team be able to play and the outcome is decided on the field. That's what I'm getting at. I want the outcome decided on the field. I don't want the outcome decided in some boardroom. And so for me, I think this is the right call. I think it's further evidence that the Big Ten just screwed over all of their teams this year, specifically the ones that had a shot at a playoff berth, which, as we've already talked about, is really just Ohio State. But this is this is further evidence that the Big Ten just did not handle this well at all. And I think this is a good decision to eliminate the minimum game requirement, and it's going to be really, I think, an opportunity for Ohio State to have that sixth game against Northwestern, a team that's been surprisingly good this year. And if it's competitive, it'll be interesting to watch. But still I think the right decision overall. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to be talking about the new college football playoff poll that came out this week. There's a few movers, a few surprises. We'll dive into those next. Welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for tuning in. Again, I'm Jay Smith. You are listening to After Further Review. Okay, we've talked about the Big Ten. We talked about Ohio State, and we've even gone through actually the top 10 of the college football playoff, and there wasn't a lot of movement. The top 6 stayed the same in this week's rankings. You have Alabama, Notre Dame, Clemson, Ohio State in the top 4, and the first 2 out, Texas A&M and Florida. But we did have a little bit of movement in the top 10, and Iowa State actually is the only team that went up in the top 10. They moved 2 spots from 9th to 7th. And the Cyclones are there's only one other 2-loss team in the top 10. So you got Iowa State at 8-2 at 7th, and then Georgia, who is at 9th right now, they're 6-2. They did drop 1 spot from last week, and Cincinnati actually dropped a spot from last week at 8-0. Again, I talked about earlier in the show a little bit of the disrespect for Cincinnati. Now, the best game last weekend, and I said this too, this game, okay, and I think you should already know what I'm talking about. This was the best non-Power 5 football game I have ever watched. And that game is, of course, Coastal Carolina and BYU. What a phenomenal football game that was out of Conway, South Carolina. How cool was it that College Game Day got to be there? How cool was it that Masters champion Dustin Johnson, an alum of Coastal, got to wear the green jacket as the celebrity picker? Like, it was awesome. It was really cool to see the Chanticleers and the Cougars playing it out in the game of the week. Coastal proved a lot with their win because I have been really high on BYU all year, and I've been giving credit to Coastal, but I just felt like the way BYU was playing, they could play with anybody in the country. What this game proved to me was less BYU is overrated and more Coastal Carolina is really, really good. That's what this game proved to me. And not only is Coastal Carolina really, really good, they have a really good defense and they play sound football. There's a lot of times when you get outside the Power 5 and you get into these, lower tier conferences, yes, there are standout athletes. Yes, there are guys that just are head and shoulders above everybody else on the field that really belong in the Power 5, on Power 5 football team rosters. But there's a lot of sloppy football. There's a lot of undisciplined football. And you didn't see that from either of these teams. Now, there were a few scrums throughout this game. That I don't think that should take away from anything that either team has accomplished this season. It wasn't like we had a knockout, brawl or anything, but a few scrums. I think that's kind of part of Coastal's mindset. They're a little bit of a chippier football team. I think they kind of play that way. I don't think they're Miami level, but I think they embody that kind of swagger. That kind of of mindset that Miami is so famous for. And again, I don't think Coastal does it to that level because Coastal's not talented to that level. I mean, when you're as talented as Miami was in the late 90s, early 2000s, you can play with that kind of swagger, right? I mean, when you're the Hurricanes from like 2001, you can play with any kind of swagger you want because you're the best football team possibly that's ever graced the earth. But Coastal kind of has that vibe. That's the vibe I get when I watch Coastal. Is they're a Miami-esque football team, but they still play sound football, and they played really, really well against BYU. With their win, they go to 10-0, first 10-0 team in Sun Belt history, and they jump up 5 spots from 18th to 13th. Now the Cougars completely they swapped, so it's interesting here. They swapped. You had Coastal 18 last week, BYU at 13. This week, Coastal's at 13, and BYU, after suffering their first loss, they dropped 5 spots to 18th. A few other movers in the CFP rankings this week. You have USC, who's 4-0. They jumped up 5 spots from 20th to 15th. The Iowa Hawkeyes have moved up 3 spots from 19th to 17th. They're 5-2 on the season. And how about the Raging Cajuns? Louisiana Lafayette, they moved up 6 spots. They're now 9-1 on the season. They were 25th in last week's rankings. They come in the top 20 now at 19th. A few teams did drop this week. Really, though, not a lot of movement. Again, the only teams that went down at all this week, Cincinnati, Georgia, both moved down a spot. BYU went down 5. And then Oklahoma State dropped 7 spots after their loss. But other than that, you had obviously Wisconsin, Marshall, Washington, and Oregon that all dropped from the rankings. Oregon continues to have turnover problems that lose them football games. That's a team that really has the talent, I think, to be almost a top 15 football team right now. I think they're probably in the top 20 range, I think, talent-wise. But I think they could get to the top 15 if they just didn't turn the ball over. If they just took care of the ball and won the games that they should be winning, I think they are a top 20 team that has the potential to move into the top 15. But the Ducks continue to be plagued by turnovers. Overall, though, I think this is a solid rankings. Again, came out this week, and not a whole lot of movement. But still, I think, they've been consistent. They've tried to be consistent. And so that's my biggest takeaway from these rankings. Okay, so let's as we finish here the show, we wrap up. Last thing here really quickly. So here's some games that you should be watching this weekend. Obviously, we have football games, which college football, it's different. I mean, normally this is conference championship week, so we are used to seeing college football on the this weekend in December, being like the 9th, the 10th, the 11th. Not accustomed to seeing this many. There was a game actually scheduled for Sunday. This was back on the 6th. It was UAB at Middle Tennessee. That was canceled. You do have a couple of games tonight on Thursday at the time of this recording. Florida Atlantic, Southern Mississippi, Pittsburgh at Georgia Tech. So you have an ACC matchup. But the really good games this weekend are on Saturday. And there's a handful of SEC games. You have Missouri, who surprisingly is ranked 25th. They're 5-3. The Tigers take on Georgia this weekend. Now, I don't think Missouri is a top 25 football team. I think this is more just done to give Georgia a top 25 opponent on their schedule that they can then beat really, really soundly. Because here's the reality. Missouri did not compete against Alabama earlier this season. They did not compete against Florida in their game. They did not compete against Tennessee. At the time, Tennessee was ranked, and it was a road game. But Missouri is not a top 25 football team. Very inconsistent. Of the teams on their schedule that are ranked this season, they're 0-3. They're 0-3. Why? They have wins against LSU. They have a 4-point win against LSU, a 10-point win against Kentucky, a 7-point win against South Carolina, and they beat Vanderbilt and Arkansas. And they're a top 25 football team? There was no one else, guys. There was nobody else you could put in there. Are you serious? Missouri's not top 25. No way. But this is done for Georgia's benefit. The Dogs are 9th right now. They dropped a spot in the rankings, as I mentioned. They're 6-2, and they're searching for another top 25 resume boosting win. They're gonna clean out Missouri. I think this game is ugly, and it's not going to be close. It's not going to be close at all because Missouri has not shown any indication this year against top 25 opponents that they can even compete. I mean, Alabama, Tennessee, and Florida annihilated these guys. What makes you think it's going to be any closer against Georgia? Not impressed at all with Missouri. They're 3rd in the SEC East. Maybe that's why they got a ranking. I don't know, but this is bizarre to see them in the top 25. Really, though, I think the better games this week that you should be looking out for are North Carolina at Miami. I think that'll be an exciting ACC matchup. Again, that's an ACC matchup that's really between the teams that are kind of in that second tier right now of the ACC. I mean, you have, obviously Clemson and Notre Dame kind of in that top tier. I mean, at the beginning of the year, it was Clemson. It was Clemson, and then there was everybody else in this big chunk. Well, now it's really Clemson and Notre Dame. Some would even have Notre Dame above Clemson, considering the head-to-head. And then you have, Miami and North Carolina. Pitt was in that second tier for a little while this season. They have fallen off. NC State has kind of made a bit of a resurgence. They're 7-3, ranked 23rd. But other than that, there's really, the Virginia Techs of the world. Louisville's way down there at 2-7. Florida State is an abysmal 1-6. Seminoles are a dumpster fire. I don't know what Mike Norvell can do there. I'm pretty surprised how bad Duke and Syracuse are this year. Duke is back to their traditional football record of 1-8. Syracuse is 1-9. 1-9. They have not looked good at all this year, which makes, when Syracuse played, which game did they play where it was pretty, they played Clemson pretty close until the third quarter, but it was the Notre Dame game. That's what I was thinking of. Yes. So when Syracuse played Clemson and then Notre Dame pretty close, it certainly raised a few eyebrows because the Orange, they're 1-10. I'm seeing here they're 1-10. I'm not sure why on their homepage. I'm checking here on ESPN. They're 1-10, but on the standings page for the conferences, they're 1-9. So I'm not sure why that has not been updated. But either way, those teams are way, way, way down there. And so really the only teams in the second tier of the ACC right now, Miami, North Carolina, and I'll throw in NC State there. I'd say there's about 5 teams right now that are in that bubble for a conference championship, with really maybe 3 that actually have a shot at it. And, this Miami-North Carolina game should be interesting, should be pretty high scoring. And you'd like to think that if North Carolina can play consistent, something they've struggled with this year, it should be an interesting game to watch. That one kicks off at 3:30 on ABC. Wisconsin at Iowa is another game that might be interesting. That's obviously not, there's not as much significance around that game because of Wisconsin's loss last week. But, if you want a pretty solid Big Ten game, I think that would be an interesting one to tune into. Other than that, you have LSU playing at Florida. That'll be a slaughter. Oklahoma State's going to play at Baylor. That one shouldn't be close. If you want to see 2 really crappy ACC teams play each other, you can watch Duke at Florida State. But man, yeah, there's not a lot out there. I'll probably tune in to see how the ranked teams play. I'm going to tune in to see how San Diego State at BYU looks. That one kicks off at 10 p.m. on ESPN2. Certainly the ones that I'm gonna have on, in the afternoon is going to be the North Carolina Miami game, and Coastal Carolina plays at Troy at 3 p.m. So that might be one you want to check out. But there's not a whole lot of exciting matchups this weekend, but there are games, so a few to turn into. Let's quickly though, as we wrap up this show, let's turn it over to the College Pick'em League. And listen, the league is finished. Their season's over. You only had 11 weeks in this particular college pick'em league, and obviously the number of games week to week kind of varied. There was a lot of things that changed throughout this pick'em league season, but it was a lot of fun, and ended up being very close and competitive at the end. Let's go through our top five finishers for the pick'em league. At fifth, with 54 correct picks in the 79th percentile, you had Razorback 11. Congratulations to him. Fourth place with 59 correct picks in the 85th percentile, you had Jackson T. Wright. Good job, Jackson. Congratulations on your fourth place finish. In third place, we had, with 61 correct picks in the 88th percentile, Hannah Reagan takes the bronze position. Congratulations to her. And in second place, with the silver medal, with 65 correct picks in the 95th percentile, Aaron Long. Congratulations to Aaron. I know we've been back and forth all season, and it's been really close. It's been really competitive, and actually we were tied going into this week, so it's been a lot of fun going back and forth with Aaron. And in first place with the goal with 68 correct picks in the 99th percentile, this man right here. Hey, what can I say? I go through each of these matchups every single week, right? I do a show, I pick all the games, I give you my analysis. It's a cheat code. You should use it. And hey, it actually paid off this year, and I was really happy to have so many picks go my way. Obviously, a lot of it is outside of my control, but it still was a lot of fun doing this league. Had lots of people participate. There was certainly a crowded leaderboard earlier this season, but it ended up kind of spacing out as the season progressed, just with some people having good weeks and some people not having great weeks. So thank you again to everybody who participated in that. And that's pretty much all the time we got for this edition of After Further Review. Appreciate you tuning in. Enjoy the games this weekend, and we'll see you back here next time. Thanks for listening.